So we're going to get super obvious here and talk about what's the point of baseball games. And essentially it's to win the game, right? At the major league level, $10 million is what every single win is worth. So when we're talking about WAR, this valuation is tying directly to that wins above replacement for a player. So that's why it's so important for them. And when you talk about the $10 million, a one WAR season would mean that they're worth $10 million on the free agent market. So when you see the guys that are having 40 WAR seasons, that's $400 million worth of value in that player. You'll often hear analysts talk about it like this, and essentially we're trying to figure out how to win more games and how to create more value with the players. Essentially though, Pythagorean win-loss formula is going to predict a team's winning percentage with about 90% accuracy just based on run differential. Two areas that are critical for this are preventing runs and scoring runs, obviously. But in this conversion, we're going to focus on how to score runs. So at its core, offense is coming down to getting on base, getting the run over, and getting them in, which means reaching base, on base percentage, and we'll touch on that more a little bit later on, advancing into scoring position, situational hitting, stealing bases, bunting. Those things matter and they provide value for our teams. And then getting them in, so driving them in, run production, RBIs. Obviously home runs help, but also can you put the ball in play? Can you get a sacrifice fly? Can you do all of those little things that do matter? At the highest levels, we'll see the correlations. And what a correlation is, it's explaining how much of the variance is able to be translated by each metric. So when we study the metrics that are most correlated with winning baseball games, you're looking at WRC plus on the top here. That's the strongest one that we have, and although it only reaches about a 0.62 correlation, and that's the strongest correlation that we know of, especially on the public scale. So some teams are able to develop internal models that can predict it a little bit more accurately than that with things like expected run value, but to the public eye, this is the strongest correlation that we have. Now, when you're talking basic stats and metrics, on base percentage is going to be the most modern one that's able to evaluate overall value with players. WOBA and OPS follow closely behind. And remember, OPS and WOBA are almost the exact same thing. WOBA just describes OPS a little bit better, a little bit more accurately. Interestingly enough, runs allowed tends to correlate more strongly with wins than runs scored. But from a skills perspective, certain batted balls and plate discipline stats still matter a lot. So let's look at a few of them and see what they're actually worth. Hard hit balls, 95 plus mile per hour exit velocity, are going to come in at about roughly 0.38 correlation to winning. That's not as strong as something like WRC plus, but it's still meaningful. You hit the ball hard more often, and good things are going to happen. Strikeout rate, on the other hand, has about a 0.061 correlation to wins at the major league level, which basically means that it doesn't matter much in that population. Now, this is where survivorship bias comes into play, and we need to keep this in mind at all times when we're looking at these correlations. At the major league level, you're looking at the best players in the world, so a team that does strike out a lot can still win because they're elite in other areas. Maybe they hit for power, maybe they walk a lot, maybe they have a really good pitching staff. But if you take in the same strikeout route down to a youth or amateur team, the story might change a little bit. If your little league team strikes out a lot, that might be a bigger problem. At those levels, you might see stats like hits or ground ball rates carry a little bit more weight into winning games than they would at the major league level because defenses aren't as skilled. So it's a higher run environment. So that being said, some stats are going to scale incredibly well across all levels of the game. Things like slugging percentage, WOBA, on-base percentage. No matter if it's Little League, college, or the MLB, if you slug, you're going to win more games. A Little League team that drives in balls for extra bases will almost always outperform the one that's stringing together a couple of singles. And even though at the youth levels, you might get more hits on the ground or score on more misplayed fly balls, those are exceptions more than rules. So yes, there is value in training skills that build confidence, like putting the ball in play. But if your goal is to win more baseball games, the data is clear. Focus on the skills that consistently correlate with winning across all levels of baseball. That's going to be your best bet, and that's the most data-driven decisions that you can make. So let's look at this chart right here. It's called the R24 chart, and basically this is going to show the expected run value for every possible base out state, meaning based on historical data, how many runs you're likely to have scored from a given situation. 2 outs, nobody on, your expected runs are going to be 0.098. Bases loaded, no outs, you're expected to score 2.29 runs. Why does this matter? Because it puts context around performance. A stat like batting average is simply counting how often you get a hit. When there's so many variables that can happen, it doesn't consider how valuable are those hits or the rest of the context around that specific hit that you got, whether runners in scoring position, etc. So that's where R24 comes into play, and it tells us how much specific play changes with your team's run expectancy based on the out base situation. So a quick example, if you lead off the inning with a single, your team goes from no outs, nobody on, so 0.48 runs expected, to no outs and run on first base, which is a 0.859 runs expected. So you increased your team's run expectancy by about 0.38 runs, and you get credited with that value over the course of the season. Now on the flip side, say you're the next batter up and you hit into a double play with that runner on first and no outs. You just moved the team's run expectancy from 0.8 down to a 0.098, so you lost your team 0.76 runs. So over the course of the season, many players will finish in the negative total run value, and that's fine, that's normal. That's where WRC plus, or weighted runs created plus, helps by normalizing these values across the league average and giving context for how productive a player is really being compared to the average player. So average would be 100 for WRC plus if you're looking on something like Fangraphs or Baseball Savant. Now at the major league level, some organizations are taking this even further, using internal models to assign run values to every single pitch. They're not just tracking hits and outs, but also bat speeds, attack angles, contact points, your decisions. Did I swing? Did I not swing? Where was that pitch that I swung at? How good was that pitch based on Stuff Plus models? They're essentially asking, how did this swing or lack of swing impact our run expectancy? This level of detail is showing you that every single pitch matters, and for someone who's played, coached, and worked as an analyst, I can tell you that it's an incredibly powerful way to evaluate your hitters. So the good news is you don't need Hawkeye, TrackMan, or Blast to start applying this at lower levels. At the college, high school, or travel ball level, you can manually chart these to track base out states, outcomes, and changes in run expectancy. This is going to allow you to bring big league level context to environments where advanced text isn't available. So when we're looking at how to score runs specifically, individual hitting versus team hitting, right, we're looking to get on base first. This is going to tell us, on base percentage specifically, is going to tell us how often the player reaches base safely, and they can do that by getting a hit, drawing a walk, or being hit by the pitch. So with getting a hit, the single best stat that we're looking to predict whether this player is able to get a hit is going to be xWOBA, expected weighted on base average. So this is looking at quality of contact, primarily exit velocity and launch angle. Something that's hard to manually track, but still possible if you're doing something like contact quality on a subjective grading scale and basing launch angles off of that too, maybe by saying line drive, fly ball, or ground ball. This is going to determine the likelihood of that batted ball outcome being a hit. So we know that 95 plus exit velocity is dramatically increasing your chance of being a hit, but 98 miles per hour is really where that spikes even higher. So if we pair that with launch angle between 10 and 30 degrees, what StatCast is calling the sweet spot percentage, you put yourself in the best position to succeed. Now, getting on base without a hit, you can either walk or get hit by the pitch. The walk to strikeout ratio is going to be the greatest evaluator of a player's offensive approach. So if the player strikes out a lot, but also walks, they can still provide value to the club, often in the form of power production. If a player is going to strike out a lot and doesn't walk, they need to hit for serious power to make up for those empty plate appearances. So speaking of power percentage, the trends have shown that balls hit to the pole side in the air are going to produce the highest slugging percentages. And if you think about it logically, the hardest balls you've hit are the longest home runs. Odds are it was hit in the air to the pole side. Here's my catch though, air pole itself doesn't strongly correlate to team winning percentage or offensive production like we've seen with some of these other stats. It's more of a spray chart observation and using logic than a universal key to success or data-driven decisions. Finally, let's zoom out. There's a clear scoring threshold for winning. Teams that score 6 runs are going to have a 60% chance to win that baseball game. When you score 6.5, it goes up to 70, and when you score 7 runs, your team winning percentage goes up to 90% chance of winning that game. So when we put it all together, get on base, hit the ball hard, ideally in the sweet spot range, take your walks and balance that with strikeouts, and understand that consistent run production over about 6 runs per game is going to be the magic number for winning baseball. Over the past 5 years or so in baseball, stolen bases have been one of the more controversial topics. For a while, they weren't a priority for most teams. Then came the pitch clock, the step-off rules, and the enlarged bases, and suddenly stolen bases were back in style. When we talk about getting over on the bases, we're not just talking about stolen bases, we're talking about how speed is changing the game. So you look at this chart here, and we find that hustle singles, infield hits, hustle doubles, and hustle triples, going first to third, advancing on those hits, and especially scoring from second to home, are going to increase our base running value significantly. So even though the correlation between base running and team winning percentage is going to be smaller, the trend is going to show that the aggressive teams over the course of a season are going to tend to win more games. So tying this back to R24, every time we take an extra 90 feet, we're changing the run expectancy for that inning. We're improving our probability of scoring runs. So there's a runner on first, no outs, we have 0.85 expected runs. There's a runner on second, no outs, we have a 1.1 expected runs. That's a gain of 0.3 runs for your team. But there's a catch. If you get thrown out in that same situation, your run expectancy is dropping 0.4 runs, which is going to be a loss of 0.4 runs. That's why many analysts are using 80% as the break-even point for success rate for stolen base attempts. So if a runner's success rate is below that, they're likely costing their team's runs over time. So back to the dollar value of WAR that we were talking about before, we know that 10 runs is going to equal about 1 win, and 1 win is going to equal about $10 million in Major League player value on the free agent market. So if a player like Corbin Carroll is providing 12 base running runs per season, that's 1.2 wins or $12 million in on-field value to his team. Now, we want to acknowledge that players are going to steal differently. They're going to run differently. So something like movement biasy, like Anthony Volpe, preferring the more upright, bouncy lead, the vaulting, the shuffling, he's going to rely on that rhythm and that timing, whereas Byron Buxton is going to be grounded and stagnant and produce that force efficiently that he needs to explode towards second base. There's no one right way, there's no one technique or style that we should be doing to steal bases. We need to make this individualized for all of our players. Now, how do we train this? We can train it with speed, linear acceleration, top end speed, force production, especially that first step, explosiveness, and movement efficiency. How well are we accelerating? How well are we using our style? And we don't need advanced text to really measure this progress. We can use timing with a stopwatch and a feedback loop that we're going to touch on later that's going to show that this is enough at any level in providing an opportunity for our guys to understand whether they're doing a good job or not. Once the ball is in play, a hitter has no control over whether a fielder makes a diving catch, the wind knocks it down, or the outfield fence is 10 feet higher at another stadium. But before contact, the hitter has much more control over how hard they hit it and what angle the ball is hit at, and we're going to go into that now. xWOBA is using historical StatCast data, so every tracked ball hit in the modern era to say, given this combination of exit velocity and launch angle, here's the expected value of that batted ball. WOBA itself is basically a more accurate version of OPS. It's assigning weights to different outcomes based on how much they contribute to a run being scored. So a walk is about 0.7, where OBP is going to give it a 1.0, and that would attribute to your OPS. A single is about a 0.9, a double is about a 1.2, a triple is about a 1.6, and a home run's at about a 1.9. xWOBA is predicting these values before the defense ever gets involved, based solely on how the ball is hit. So I think Shohei Ohtani hit a home run about 450 feet at Dodger Field. That was a 2.0 xWOBA. Every single time that ball's been hit, it's been a home run. Of course it has. It went 450 feet to right field. So if you look at the exit velocity versus launch angle chart in the bottom left-hand corner here, you'll see that once you hit a ball about 98 miles per hour, it turns really green, meaning high WOBA value. Over 100 miles per hour, it spikes even more. The sweet spot is 10 to 30 degrees of launch angle, if you notice right here, and that's when xWOBA is at its highest. So above 0, below 40, if you're hitting 100 plus miles per hour, you're almost guaranteed to hit based on the historical data. Bat speed has the strongest correlation with exit velocity. It's about a 0.7, meaning the harder you swing efficiently, the harder you'll hit the ball. Pair that with the right launch angle, and your xWOBA is going to skyrocket. When we look at spray angle versus exit velocity, there's actually not much difference in xWOBA whether you pull the ball or go oppo. This is challenging our thought from before that pulling the ball automatically equals more success. Statistically it doesn't, but logically it does. If you look at spray angle versus launch angle, you'll see the dips in the charts. Those are fielders. So certain combinations line up right where the infielders are, which is why some ground balls or line drives get scooped up even if they're hit well, and some find their way through. So hitting the ball hard and in the air is more indicative of a skill than just getting a hit in the box score. The more often you control those two factors, exit velocity and launch angle, the higher your xWOBA and the more sustainable your success is going to be at the plate.